Today on Workshop Chat, I'm going to be talking about how I converted this shed into my workshop. Hope you enjoy. So the very first thing that I did with this shed was I actually had to fix up the frame. It was rusted out in a couple of spots because it's been sitting here for a while. Had dropped into the dirt. It's not on a slab, so it's just got those 600mm by 600mm square concrete slabs holding it down, and that's what the floor is, and we'll get to that in a little bit. So after I corrected that, you can see here that this whole thing is painted white. So what I did is I put two priming coats on the inside and the outside. This is galvanized tin, so I had to have a primer for the paint to stick. I used Taubman's all-weather exterior paint, which I put on the outside, and I decided to put it on the inside because it lightened the whole inside up, and that made it better for filming, which means it wasn't something I did initially, but after I'd painted the outside, I noticed that that did such a good job, and the main reason for that was to reduce the temperature on the outside of the shed, and it actually makes quite a difference. You wouldn't expect it to, but it did. And then I actually did the same up in here and to the door here, and created a bit of bracing for the door as well, because the frame had all moved out of shape and it had dropped, so when I repaired it I couldn't lift it back up just because of where it was, and so that's why you see this extra strip on the top of the door just here as well, and that was just part of getting it sealed. The next step I did was set about sealing the shed up as best I could because it was full of spiders and all that sort of thing, so I wanted to get rid of that. And so you can see I've used the corrugated heavy density foam around the frame. I sealed with expanding foam, just the little cans of Sikaflex sealing foam, something like that, and sealed a few areas around the place, down the bottom and up around the top of the frame in various spots. And so what I wanted to do was just stop a lot of the insects, ants, cockroaches, spiders, all those sort of things that we don't really want in our workshop getting in here, and that was all part of converting this space into the workshop. Although there are still some that get in, and I'll talk about what just happened recently in a little bit, right towards the end. And yeah, so it's not 100% sealed off. You don't really want it 100% sealed off. You want some movement of air through the shop without the door open, and so that's what I did around here. So now we need to look over here to see what I did next. So I wanted to clad these areas around here for the workshop to put tools up. I knew I was going to be wanting to put tools up, and so what I did, and we can see just down over here behind the camera over here, what I did to attach bits of wood right the way around. So what you need to see is over here to start with. So down here we can actually see how this whole shed was constructed. It's an 80s build, 1980s build, and it was just a angled steel like this, non-galvanized angled steel welded together, overlapped in the corners, and so that's what we're working with here. And so the reason I wanted to show you that is if we look over here, we can see how I attached a lot of these boards. So I used a lot of scrap, some of it's MDF, some of it's plywood, some of it I did have to buy, but for the most part it's bits of MDF that were just lying around that were already out here, and so I wanted to make use of that. And so after that we can see over here there's little tiny screws. So what happened was I drilled a few holes through the frame all the way around where I put the boards, and then used screws on an angle up against it to put pressure against the boards, and that's what held it in there, along with what you can see here, little bits of wood as wedges to actually just help stiffen it up. And that is how the walls of this are clad, and you can see it was just like this bare straight metal here to start with. And so that's what I did even over here where you see all the tools behind me. So let's sit around there and we'll have another look at what I did over there. So I used a bunch of smaller pieces of MDF and stuff on this board along here, and then I added these strips in between, kind of making it look like a sort of a shaker style build. And that's what I started mimicking here, and then kind of gave up when I got to the back wall. So right along here was MDF that was painted. And I had taken apart some old cabinets that had these boards and some shelving units that I'd picked up off the verge. And it had these molded strips. So what I did is I recessed at the back of them, pushed them up and then screwed them in and then filled over the top of them. And that covers up the strip where I used the screws to hold it all in, and it helps to hold all the boards in further below it just because of the way it's attached in here. And it's just, it stiffened it up and it made it look nice and decorative and kind of covered up the ugly pieces. Similarly, down the bottom here, I added another piece over the top of the steel, and in this case, I screwed this strip to the top piece that was already held in with the screws, and then pushed the other pieces that are down in the bottom up into it and helped to hold them. And so they're actually wedged in place, these lower bits there. They're not really held. They're just in their friction fit behind this decorative strip here. Now what I used here was any strips of old bits of pine, some old drawer fronts and that sort of thing. And I kept it that different colour down the bottom to kind of give a transition. And I didn't see the need to actually lighten that up, especially for filming. And so if you're going to do this, you might not need to lighten it up like I have. I wanted to lighten it up so I had more ambient light in here for filming, because it was very, very dark initially, and I really wanted to transition that to make it much lighter. And so that's why I lightened this up. I painted this back stripping all here. Now along the back here, this is some old tongue and groove boarding that was off the back of a bookshelf that I cut and fit in along here. And we'll talk about just over here off camera in a second. So initially I told you that this flooring is those rectangular squared concrete blocks, and that was very unlevel, especially when I wanted to move things with casters around in here. And so initially what I did in here was use some of that sort of carport garage vinyl matting, and that was down here. And the problem I had is in the first summer that I had it out here, it actually shrunk. And so I left that under here and ended up buying these masonite boards here. Now the idea I had with that was that I wanted to cover the floor, and I thought plywood, but the plywood was too expensive. This masonite came in at a decent price to be able to do it. And then what I did is I sealed these masonite boards with marine grade varnish. And I actually used two different cans. The first can was a little bit of leftover that I'd used from making some signs and stuff in the past. And so I put that on the back one here, and that's not worn as well as the new can that I got to put here, which was the high gloss varnish, and that wore a lot better. And so I concentrated carefully here around the door where a lot of water would be, and made sure that both the bottom and the tops of these boards here were sealed. As for the rest of it, I only put the varnish on the top, and I think it's been there for about 2 years now, and it's still going well. It's great for protecting the tools from dropping onto the concrete so they don't get damaged. It's a little bit easier to walk around on, and it does allow these items that I've got with casters to slide around on a nice smooth surface. And so that was a big win. I don't know if it would necessarily work in other people's workshops, but for me, it's worked in my situation and done a really good job. And so after I got to this point, I decided that I needed to actually create some storage in here, and I needed to create some better storage for the items, the household items that were already out here in the shed. And so we're going to look over here and show you what I did there. So this is the side of the shed that you don't often see. It's not my filming side, and as you can see, I mean, it's not too bad. What I did is bought these sort of shed shelving units. I got that one there and one over here for my wood storage. And I knew from early on that I needed to have a few iterations, and I did until I settled on these shelving units here for the wood storage and the storage for everything else. Welders, household containers, and just general bric-a-brac and all of that. And that got stored over here, out of the way on one shelving unit, and gardening tools, ladders, all of that over in that corner there. And so I knew that I wanted to keep that separation but still have space in this area. So I wanted this area to have free space, because obviously the camera sits right here most of the time. And so I needed a fair space for that tripod to sit there, and it was kind of important that I got that worked out. And I didn't settle on this quickly, but eventually I did get there. And so after I did that storage, I set to work out some more storage for my tools. So my first iteration of storage for my tools, and at this stage I didn't have a lot, but I was like, I always knew that I needed 20%, 50% more because I was going to expand and keep going. And so initially I stored my axes, carving axes, all that up here, because when I first got into woodworking I was doing a lot of spoon carving. And if you want to see some more on that, maybe let me know down below, because I can show you some of the spoons that I've carved and some of the tools that I used. And that was what got me into woodworking. So I had Granford Brooks Swedish carving axe, and I had a little hatchet, a draw knife. I haven't used the draw knife a lot. And then I had this whole idea of maybe making myself a Q log cabin at some point, and so I ended up picking myself up a couple of side axes, and that's what we did there. Now, I also stored my hammers, and that was where the storage kind of stopped initially. Now, what you see up here at the moment is not my original storage iteration that I had here, and if I can find the few of my early videos, you'll see the tool cabinet and stuff, so I'll show you some shots of that just so you can see what it is. Now, the one thing in this area that has stayed the same and constant the entire time is this ground cabinet down here that I made with these sliding drawers and sawtooth shelving units, which allows you to adjust your shelves, but it's not using pins, it's using these proper sawtooth holders. If you do want to check out the build video, I think I have a 3 or 4 part series that I will link down below if you want to check that out, because I think that was a great build, and I still think it's one of my best builds. It's practically my biggest build other than my workbench that I've done to date, and I was pretty proud of the way it came out. So if you guys are interested, please check it out. So essentially this is sitting up here and supporting the wall of this shed here, which is actually a little bit loose due to damage to the frame that I couldn't repair, and so that's partially why I made such a solid unit here to start with. But this was my first storage. I had all my tools, my finishes, everything down in this cabinet. Obviously I'm going to try and show you those shots of how it was before. So I had a tool cabinet here, and that was okay. I used that for a little bit, but then I realized that it didn't exactly function the way I wanted it to. It had doors that opened. I always left them open because it got in the way of the gap that I've got here, which is maybe just over a meter gap here to work in. And so the tool cabinet was coming out, and with the doors shut it was sitting out past here, and so it was encroaching into my space, especially when I was hand sawing and moving around. So I left the cabinet open all the time, which meant that it didn't perform its function of keeping the dust off anything. Even with the doors shut, the dust still managed to find its way in there when it was open and closed and stuff, and my tools still rusted. And so you probably will have seen the video, and I'll leave that down below, to where and why I changed my tool storage. I did a video on that, so I'll leave that link down below for you. And then we came to this storage as part of that. Now, I repurposed the doors from the cabinet. I cut the bottom off my tool cabinet here because I still wanted these storage drawers, and I'm still not settled on the storage that I actually have here in the bottom here. And so if you guys have any ideas, let me know some ideas that you might do here to encompass marking tools and some drawers and stuff just in this little gap here, which is maybe 1/2 meter by about 1 meter. That's probably the area we're working with there. And so I repurposed the doors for the current till here. Added a couple of holders, as you can see. I utilized the door over here for my wooden hand planes, which were initially housed here behind this, which is the original main carcass of the tool cabinet that ended up over there on that wall, and has now been moved back here just recently, is a window. Now, the window always leaked. It didn't open and close properly. It's all sealed off on the outside, and so I had this piece of timber pushed inside the inside of it, and kind of just friction fit there, and that was what I originally had my wooden hand planes on. But when I moved that, you would have seen that I had a couple of chisel racks storage on there, and that changed just recently because I ended up, and this is what I said I'd talk about, is I ended up with an ant's nest up here. I somehow got in between the original shelf that I had up here and the tool cabinet, and they laid a whole nest in behind them, so I had to pull all of this apart. Now, in pulling that apart, I realised that this top shelf was damaged and I couldn't put it back in, and the way I initially had it attached, I couldn't access that any longer, so I went ahead and put a new shelf up here. This happens to be 3 fronts of drawers of an old tool chest that I found on the side of the road. I was originally going to keep it for the thinner pine to make boxes and stuff, but it worked out that it looked perfect up here and worked, and so that's what I've used up here. Now, as part of this iteration, I ended up designing this cabinet that I never really 100% finished, and that's what this is here. And it had the top of my original workbench that I talked about once before, which is 3 pieces of 19mm melamine glued together, and then pine strip on the outside, and it was going strong, but I wanted a better top for the workbench that I'm currently using, because I wanted to use holdfast in it, and the holdfast didn't work well on the melamine bench, and I never attempted it there, and so that's why I went for my laminated Robot style. But after I moved that cabinet here recently, I added this extra storage in over here, just some little boxes that I was able to screw up onto the wall, and just to house some of the storage that used to be up the top here. And yeah, that's not important, but so storage here, and once again the walls lined here, and I ended up putting some plywood, 3mm plywood up here with some strips in the ridges of the roofing, and that's to help with the sound. And I also had some leftover sound deadening batting from car builders from when I did my 4-wheel drive, and so I put some of that up here to help try and stop some of the moisture ingress that I was getting in here when you get the hot and cold and the condensation, because this workshop is uninsulated. And so yes, we get mild winters here where I am in Perth, Western Australia, but it still can get down into the negatives and in, you know, the low 1 digits, and so that can cause a problem when you have the higher temperatures and get the condensation. And so that was to help stop that, and that's partially this, which is what I did recently, and I think it's actually helped a lot to the feel of the workshop as well. So what else have I done recently? Well, you might have noticed the addition of these little lights, and that was just to add a little bit of exchange and sort of differentiation between me and the backdrop, a little bit of colour. It's a little bit of a display sort of design as well, and I can change the colours on these lights, and so it was something a little flexible that I decided to put in here recently as well. So now that I've talked about all the storage, there's one other thing that I haven't mentioned, and that is that this workshop is not actually connected up to mains power. It has an extension cord that runs in, and I'm just going to show you how I connect that up to get lights and run a few tools out here, because obviously I'm mainly hand tool workshop, mainly because of the space available, but also the lack of power connected and only connected up via an extension cord. So let's have a look at where the power comes in and then how I connect my lights up. This yellow cord that you see coming in here, it's a little long, so I've run it over there because I didn't want to cut it, because it's a fixed weatherproofed extension cord. It comes into this 8-port power board here. They have little dust covers on here, which is important. You don't want dust getting into your power points, and because dust does build up out here, if nothing's plugged into them, they've got little swivel connections. And so all the power comes in here, and you can see that I have 6 plugs coming off here. These 2 go to some custom-made extension cords that run across to the lights, which I'll show you in a sec. This one here just runs to this little lamp here. This one here runs to those coloured lights that you just saw. Runs up along and around. And then that's about it. I've got one that goes across to my little DeWalt charger over here as well. And so that's how all the power comes in, and so I can't use a lot of power out here. I'm restricted to that 2400 watts, which is the maximum this power board can use, and even then I don't like to go to that maximum because it seems to cause the lights to flicker and stuff, so it might not be ideal, but this is only really meant to be a temporary setup, and so I plug the power in when I need it, unplug it when I'm not using it, and that's what I work with. So now let's just look up here and I'll just show you how I've got these lights connected up and what they are. So I obviously quickly discovered that I needed some lights, and so my solution was to add some bits of wood through here, and these are do-it-yourself 240 volt lights that are plugged in via this power board here that's just cable tied up here. And so it runs in, plugs in here, and I've got switches to all my lights just here if I ever need to change them. And so I have these 4 lights that are just the 240 volt, and they just clip onto these little clips like this, LED strip lights, and they do a pretty good job. And in addition to that, I actually have a couple of these little lights here, boiling LED filming lights that allows me to actually set the Kelvin rating of the lights, and that's important because I needed to match the Kelvin ratings here, so when I do my color balancing, when I edit, it's a lot easier without having different heat temperature of lights. And so one light here, one on top of the camera there, and that is all the lighting that I really have out here, other than these couple of little desk lamps that I don't use a whole lot anymore because the lighting is a little bit off on them compared to my other lights, and so I only use them if I need to fill some extra ambient light, because these ones produce a bit of a, based on the bulb that's in here, it's a bit of a, the same Kelvin rating as my lights up here, but I don't really need the extra lighting, so I only use them if I really need a lot of extra light in one spot, maybe if I'm like sharpening a handsaw or something like that. So that is how my workshop went from an outback shed into this workshop, and then kind of into a filming studio. And obviously the setup here has evolved over time, so I've been changing what I've been doing out here for 3-4 years now, and it's just getting better and better with every iteration. And I think the last iteration has made this workshop way more functional than it was before. Now, I don't know if you guys reckon that, but to me, I think it's in a much better state than it was originally, and now I'm very much liking using it a lot more out here, and I've just keep adding more and more storage out here. And the big fight is over here, keeping this space clear, because you always need clear space to put things that you're restoring, and a lot of what you see over here is tools that I'm restoring because I want to restore a whole bunch more hand planes, and I'd love to try and sell them, so we'll see what happens there. So I'd like to thank you for following me as I went through this little trip down memory lane of how I converted this tool shed into my workshop over time, and I think it looks pretty good right now. I think it's functioning well, it works well, it's easy to work in, easy to film in, even more importantly for you guys. And I just want to thank you for coming along as I showed you this, and now I hope you have a better understanding of exactly how I went about the process of converting this shed. And remember, in a workshop which is limited in space like mine is, I have about 2.4 to the edge of the bench here to the wall, and 2 meters from the wall to the edge of my bench here, is that the tool storage that you have, try and get it as flat against the wall as possible, where possible. And don't forget to use top layers, so right up here, up to the wall, right to the roof, and down by the floor, and just get it as flat against the wall as possible, and that's going to allow you to have a lot more storage and just fit more tools into a smaller area such as I have. And also don't forget the importance of storage under your workbench, because that is one of the most vital areas where you can store tools, have tool chests and all that sort of thing, and store a lot more stuff, and it weighs your bench down, so it's actually a really good spot there as well. So if you like this video, please consider liking and subscribing, and please don't forget to sound off in the comments. What did you like about this? Are there any suggestions where you think maybe I could improve the way I've converted this? Or has it given you some ideas for how to convert your shed into a wonderful workshop like mine? And if you'd like to support me a little bit further, please don't forget to check me out on Patreon, or even check out becoming a member here on YouTube. And if you'd like to see another Workshop Chats video like this one, please check out the one up here where I tell you about all my mistakes with building this workbench. Bye for now.